Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and good morning. I'm Jenny Guy, Vice President of Marketing and Communications at Mediavine, and your panel moderator for our discussion on the evolution of SPO, Can Both Sides Win? Supply path optimization is one of the hottest industry topics up for debate. It is frequently discussed on ad tech conference stages and the impetus for countless streams of product announcements in the ad trades, but the question remains, are all the moves being made actually getting us closer to the goal of more efficiency? We knew when choosing this topic that we were joining a very crowded playing field, so it was important to us to add something different to the discussion. We are confident you will find that in our panel of industry experts who cover the gamut of buy side, sell side, and everything in between. Let's meet them. Jean Fitzpatrick is the SVP of Performance Partnerships at Magna, the intelligence and investment arm of IPG Media Brands, overseeing strategy, innovation, and partnership development teams in the digital marketing space. Chris Kane is the founder and president of Jounce Media. Jounce is the industry leader in programmatic supply chain management and publishes widely read research on the state of industry supply path optimization initiatives. Everyone in the industry is or should be reading Jounce's monthly reports. Amanda Martin is Mediavine Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Business Strategy at Mediavine. With over 20 years of programmatic experience on both the buy and sell side, she brings her passion for transparency and industry-serving standards to today's panel. And finally, Patterson is the General Manager for Publisher Development at The Trade Desk. Responsible for deal-based buying around the globe, she focuses on strategic publisher and supply vendor partnerships. Like Amanda, Catherine has experience working on both the demand and supply sides of the digital ecosystem, and that point of view will be pivotal in today's discussion. It is a heavy-hitting panel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Welcome. We're going to start out with a little bit of level setting. As supply path optimization can mean different things to different people, often depending on what side of the industry they sit on. So I'd like to kick things off by establishing a baseline. For each panelist, please define what supply path optimization means to you and your organization and what steps are being taken to implement or promote that strategy. And let's kick things off with Catherine, please.
Oh, wow. I get to start?
Yeah.
I feel like it's a quiz. What is SPO?
You are welcome.
I thank you, Jenny, for the intro. That was one of the loveliest intros I've had in a long time. I think SPO is one of the most talked about and least understood topics in our industry. Although I'm hopeful that everyone is listening to Chris's, monthly reports, because I think that helps unwind a lot of the complication that's happening. SPO has a lot of palace intrigue and artificial competitive dynamics. Ultimately, for us at the Trade Desk, it's really about transmitting value efficiently to transparent, signal-rich supply. And I think within the term SPO, it really kind of tells you what to focus on. First, supply. Who are you buying from? Who's the content provider? Who's selling it? Paths, what signals are included in those paths? And then optimizing against that. And so at Trade Desk, we've really kind of spent the last couple of years removing a lot of structural inefficiency and obfuscation that was kind of born out of header, a lot of duplicative auctions, a lot of auction manipulation, a lot of obfuscation on signals, and really made a concerted effort to pull that apart so we can really analyze, apples to apples, the supply and the path and optimize against that for the value of our buyers like Jean. And so a lot of what we've done is orient around ads.txt, sellers.json, supply chain object, push new industry kind of terms like global placement ID, transaction ID. We built open paths so that we have this kind of benchmark or baseline to understand supply. And then what we do when we're looking at that is when we get a request from Mediavine, we can now look across those, 20 to 25 different paths we get the request from and ensure that the value for Jean or our advertisers is being transacted most efficiently within the auction. So that's kind of a very long-winded way to say at the end of the day, it's quality and value, transparency of signal, and efficiency of that bid and making sure we're winning the bids that we want.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing all of that. And since you called her out by name, I could not help but go to Jean Fitzpatrick. Next, Jean.
Thank you, Jenny. And thanks, Catherine, because you set me up pretty well. I think it is really complicated and it can mean so many different things depending on who you're talking to. And Amanda and I have had that conversation. So I'll focus a little bit more on how we describe it and speak to it with our clients, because what we really want to do is get out of that habit of like getting really into the jargon of programmatic, which I think we all get very excited about, but it can be really confusing and overwhelming. And then it just totally loses the plot and the value of what can be done in supply path optimization. So we try to break it up into 3 categories: partnerships, analytics, and customization. So we will essentially survey the entire marketplace, like yearly, maybe twice a year, really depending on how many trends and disruptors we're seeing in this space that are changing the dynamics of the supply chain. And through those RFIs, we'll start to establish what the baseline is in like SSPs. So we're looking at supply chains that are similar and we're judging them against each other. And then we will look at past investment where we're seeing the best performance. We're looking at things like price and viewability. And this kind of gets into what Catherine was saying about what are those signals that we're seeing in the supply chain. And just to be clear, this gets really complex when you're starting to do it across many platforms, because each platform isn't the same. And really below those platforms, what's next in the supply chain from those platforms is the supply side platforms, and those signals are slightly different. Yes, we're all on OpenRTB, but how everybody uses and defines the different dimensions within the OpenRTB protocol varies greatly. And so what the platforms can then give to us as buyers is going to be different as well. So we're looking at analytics, and then we look at customization. Where can we start to drive value for clients at a macro level? So for all of our clients, and then where do we start to find that customization that's specific to us, to one client's business outcomes? So we're always looking at like a macro version and a micro version of supply path optimization. And ultimately what we're trying to get back to is, how do we help our clients understand what responsible investment is in this very complex, nuanced supply chain? How do we continue to cut out what we don't think is valuable and then deliver value on top of what the supply chain was already giving us through those partnerships? And it comes down to selecting those premier partners and working with them to help build their businesses, so we don't have to work with 1,000 partners.
Absolutely. Quality, not quantity. I'm going to turn us over to Amanda from Mediavine, please.
Great. And I think from the publisher side, it's even more complicated. And having moved from the buy side to the sell side most recently, I think my experience has changed because publishers need to meet the demand where it's coming from. And so historically, that was be everywhere, cover everything. But as the buy side has started to become more intentional and to pick those paths and those differentiators from who they want to buy from, we need to do demand path optimization, meaning we need to be where buyers like Jean want us to be, and where our quality inventory best performs and best transacts. And so it's a little different from our side because we have to react not only to the signals we see, but then the signals that the buy side is reacting to. And so it gets very complex, very fast. And I think it's one of the reasons why publishers struggle with it a bit, and they just decide, okay, I'm going to throw everything against the wall and see what sticks. But that creates the duplication and the lack of transparency that the demand side is working heavily to clean up. And so I think for Mediavine, it's about doing our part. It's about picking the most efficient paths to our inventory. It's about listening to the demand side and understanding what they expect from us, what signals they need to see from us, what clarity about our inventory do they need to have. And then it's the fact that there's a human element to it as well. The open internet is vast. Machines can't pick everything. You get into very kind of gray areas where what is this site? What's the value of it? And I think that's, for us, the proposition that we bring to the marketplace is that we vet our publishers. We know the quality we're putting out to the demand side, and then we're listening to them to understand where they want to be. But at the base level, we don't need inefficient paths. We don't need multiple hops. We know the best path to our inventory as well, so we can inform buyers from our side also where to get the inventory they're looking for, because not all paths are created equal, even if they're both direct. And so it really is a collaborative effort. And I think having come from the buy side to the sell side, it just multiplies the complexity. But it's definitely something that experts like ourselves on this panel are doing a great job of navigating. And I think if we get to a place where we're holistically doing it at that macro level, to Jean's point, the industry can get a lot cleaner, a lot more efficient, a lot more transparent, and quite frankly, just grow up a bit. And so that's where Mediavine is bringing our contributions to supply path, demand path optimization story.
Amanda, great answer. And I think we may have missed the title for this webinar. SPO, or Will the Industry Grow Up a Bit, was what I'm thinking could have been the alternative title for this. So thank you for sharing that. Missed opportunity, maybe in our retargeting efforts. Chris, bring it all home. We've got a neutral party here standing outside with the data.
Well, I think you set up well, and I appreciate you framed it that way, because I think, probably the most value that my team and I can bring to this whole supply path optimization discussion is some sort of trust or credibility of independence across the supply chain. And I think the way that we think about supply path optimization is pretty simple. It is just a matter of buyers making very deliberate decisions about where to deploy their investments, both which publishers to transact with and which paths to use. I was sort of, borrowing Catherine's framing from earlier. We think there's choices to make about what supply you want to buy in the first place, and there's choices to make about which paths to buy. And I think different companies are responsible for those things. Brands and agencies mainly are responsible for making business choices about which supply do I want to buy in the first place. Platforms like the Trade Desk are mainly responsible for identifying which is the optimal supply chain. And to just be clear about our role, we're not responsible for any of those things. We have zero control over either of those choices. But what we can do is provide some sort of independent analysis to inform those choices. And the way that we think we can make the biggest impact on the industry is by maintaining a really rigorous data set that sort of tracks every path to every website, every mobile app, and every CTV app, publishing research on top of it, which I appreciate some of you referencing. But then importantly, surfacing that raw underlying data in a very transparent way that frankly is sort of painful for us. And just showing thousands of people who access our product exactly what we think is the right call. And I think a main observation that I have had over the last several years, and that folks on my team have sort of coalesced around, is that there are a lot of people in the industry who have opinions, and there's a lot of people in the industry who have facts, and there's very few companies that have both of those things. Like the Venn diagram doesn't have much overlap. Like you hear a lot of people talking on social media with a lot of opinions that aren't underpinned by a lot of facts. And unfortunately, we've got a lot of particularly measurement companies in the industry who have a lot of facts and are very reluctant to overlay their opinions on top of that. And I think Amanda sort of touched on this before when she was saying, like, you just cannot automate away a lot of these decisions. Like, you need people to have business oversight and make business judgment calls. And so we're trying to occupy some space that's the overlap of those two things in a very transparent way, publish research and dashboards and other kinds of outputs to just help media buyers, whether that means a brand or an agency or a platform like the Trade Desk, make those business decisions. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure, more as we get into the content here, but I am much more optimistic than I've been over the last 5 years that the industry is moving in the right direction, that brands and agencies are starting to act more like brands and agencies and make business choices about what supply meets our standards, and that platforms, the Trade Desk, but others as well, are willing to sort of get more aggressive about identifying technical points of waste in the supply chain.
Appreciate that a lot. And, Chris's TLDR is we have no dog in this fight. And I very much appreciate as well the bringing in of the human element, the crucial piece that's missing, that it's not just algorithms. So thank you guys for all of your answers. We're going to dive directly in. We could not have a conversation of this type without addressing that just last month, we all read the news in the Wall Street Journal about Google violating its promised ad standards, as well as the ANA report on programmatic transparency. And while it is new data, it is nothing new to the industry. It feels like we've reached a maturity point, but how do we put issues like this in the rear view mirror? Who is interested in hopping into that water first? Don't make me call on you. Catherine's unmuted.
I am. I've been on. God, that's why. Great. Maturity point. I feel like we've been talking about how we're all growing up. This is a point of like, yeah, we're maturing and we're growing up. And I hope that, similarly to dating, like you're not gonna, at some point you're like, I'm not willing to continue to take this person's like, no, just trust me. I can get better. I can grow up. No, this is all gonna be fine. Like, we want a better relationship and we need to move on, right? And so I think at this point, we need to stop giving Google the benefit of the doubt. We know that their self-interests are both on their demand and supply side. And I think the maturity point we're at is kind of we're no longer willing to accept obfuscation and continued bias. And I think we need to vote with our dollars in places where there is more transparency and more choice. And a lot of the challenge with Google was around kind of them saying that this is what you're buying, agency, just trust me. We've been working super closely with the ANA going into kind of the new video placement standard. Our goal is always to make sure that our, agencies and buyers like Jean and her clients understand what they're buying and can properly value that. And so I think that the challenge with what Google did was they want to just kind of own all of that and say it meets our standard, but not tell you. We aggressively want to kind of be transparent about that and show the value for in-stream versus outstream. And I want to give huge props to Mediavine here as one of the early adopters of the new video placement signal. And I think, again, a maturation point for the industry where we're moving towards more transparency and signal and understanding the value to our advertisers. So
there's a piece in what CP was just saying that I think hooks really closely to a point Amanda was making earlier around incentives. And I think my thinking has evolved a lot on this topic over the last couple of years. I, for a while, sort of thought about companies on the sell side as good guys and bad guys. And I don't think I ever would have used that language, but like that was kind of like the mental framework I had. And I think that's totally wrong. Like there are some good guys and there are some bad guys, but mainly companies on the sell side are just rational actors. And I think this Google story is an excellent example of where the rational behavior for publishers is really counterproductive for the industry. Like when a giant source of video demand does not reward legitimate high quality in-stream placements in the way that buyers expect, and instead shoots money at low quality video supply, well, then the rational incentive for companies on the sell side of the market is not to make high quality video products. And that's one example of many, but we're not dealing with good actors and bad actors, and we can't make an industry plan on the assumption that people are going to be good actors. We have to make an industry plan on the assumption that companies across the supply chain are going to act in their rational self-interest, and we have to change the incentives.
Great.
I have a question about what do you think changing the incentives looks like? Because on the buy side, when we're dealing with kind of these different controversies that pop up, where each client is kind of managing what their threshold for quality versus reach and performance is going to be. So there's definitely there are tools to block some of that inventory, and some account teams obviously do that, and other media buyers are more really performance based, and they're okay with going to a little less quality in some circumstances. So
yeah,
I
think if an individual buyer wants to outmaneuver their competitors, these are opportunities. But if you want to fix the industry, the only thing that matters is platform defaults. And I think this relates to the MFA analysis from the ANA as well. Like the only thing that will change the industry is a platform like the Trade Desk or DV360 or Amazon DSP or Criteo or Yahoo DSP changing their default settings to say, If you want to buy made for advertising inventory, you need to push a button that says, I want this. And no one's going to push the button, and then no one will buy it. If you push that burden to brands and agencies and say, you have the tools to build lists of things you want to like, yeah, okay, you do have those tools. And smart buyers can outmaneuver their competitors, but you won't change the industry. Like, most buyers are going to transact on whatever the default setting is of their DSP.
Right. And I
Chris,
think that those platforms, not only is it like, I mean, I think there's platforms on both sides that need to make the decision, but I do think that it starts with the buy side platform, because the sell side platform is going to be similarly incentivized as the publishers are. But like, I think we've seen a lot of great tools come out of the trade desk. I mean, that's where we see a ton of flexibility and a ton of customization, which is incredibly valuable to us. And then we've seen in other cases, and this is across all platforms, a concern from our platform partners that we are going to cut off so much supply, we will hurt our ability to scale and advertise. And that comes back to that balance of quality and reach, and like, how can we make those decisions, because we're only ever going to be as good as the options that we have or the levers that we have in these platforms. I mean, we'll definitely go that layer deeper. We do as much as we can, even when those tools don't exist, but at a certain point, you can't prevent the inventory from coming into the system. I think that's like the big difference in direct buying and programmatic buying that I see, is like, I cannot stop the wave of inventory that comes in without the support of those platforms. So I can tell them what my standards are. I can work around them. I can work with third-party partners, and I can work with Jounce to try and find it. There's still going to be very specific tools that I have to manipulate or layer on top of each other if that toggle, if that like green button, red button doesn't just sit there or isn't by default done.
just kind of building on that, Jean, I agree with you that, and Chris, I agree with you that like the default needs to be, we continuously push the standard around reducing MFA, making sure that signal is appropriate. You know, we're pushing new viewability standards, new video placement standards. And so all of that starts to become the default marketplace that Jean and team can trust to scale their buys. But what I don't want is we keep foisting this complexity onto the buy side, when really, Chris, you made a great point that like pathing should be a platform consideration, because it is so heavy and there's so much data and so much choice there. And that's really on us to kind of help our buyers kind of navigate that. I also think that part of it is when we make these standards or these defaults, we get a lot of blowback at times about, why did you do this? You cut off my supply. You're being punitive or vindictive by doing this, when really, I think there's pain in maturation, and we believe the open internet can be better. And we want to set standards so that that continues to rise, and that dollars that Jean are putting into our system continue to be distributed in a valuable way towards partners who have quality, clean signals like Mediavine and others. And I think that, you know, the onus is on us to be good agents of those dollars.
Right, but I think that there is a difference between the buy side perspective and CP, what you're saying, and Chris, what you're saying is that like there has to be a balance in those platforms between choice and decisioning for us, because there's customization that has to happen with the clients. We have to be able to customize your algorithm, and we have to sometimes be able to customize those paths. And we might have a difference of opinion than what the platform has.
Fully agree.
So to be able to use that platform to the best of our abilities, there has to be like that, that balance of choice and kind of like pre-optimization.
I couldn't agree more, Jean. I think that like there's a standard where this is what we're doing. If you want to change that or make your own choices, like here's every way that you can do that. And I think we always need to offer that option to our buyers.
But that means that then the trade desk still has to take on more load than what they think that they need to, because buyers might have a different opinion about what they want to buy.
I think that's a critical point. It is cost prohibitive for almost every DSP, possibly the trade desk, to actually do the thing that Jean you're asking for. You just can't cover the cost of listening to 20 million bid requests per second. Certainly if you're a smaller DSP. And so that means that in almost every DSP, it is actually not possible to do exactly what the buyer wants. And I just think that's like a reality of the industry that buyers need to be aware of, and then helping, inform the choices of, like, with whether it's Trade Desk or some other DSP, knowing that the DSP will not be able to literally listen to every bid request in the bid stream, informing the DSP's choice of, like, all right, this is the stuff that's going to be on by default, and we want full pipe access to this supply. And then around the edges of it, here's other supply that we're going to ignore by default, but that we will listen to, so that when we get a smart buyer from IPG or somewhere else who says, I know this supply doesn't meet your platform standards, but we want to buy it, that supply is at least available.
Yeah, I think, Jean, a point that I feel for you, because I was on the agency side, is that there isn't this like good/bad line that clearly exists. There is a big gap, a gray area of good to bad. It's a range. And so I do think that buyers have the choice of what they want to buy across that. And I think sometimes when we have reports come out, we like to create a lot of controversy about, like, this is good and this is bad, as opposed to acknowledging like the nuance of the reality of the challenges that Jean faces as a buyer, and then the challenges that publishers face. So I think when I look at the Wall Street Journal article or the ANA report, I think, how can publishers meet the expectations of the buy side? Like, how does a site better themselves? And what we've found is that sites that take really proactive, maybe counter logical choices to put less ads on their site, increase their viewability, change how people navigate through their sites, they actually get incentivized because their CPMs actually go up, as opposed to multiplying low CPMs. They're increasing a few CPMs and they're getting more bang for their buck. But I think that's where like the give and take is. And I think platforms are in the middle. So they're definitely in a tug of war of, like, what side are they listening to or responding to? And I think for publishers and for buyers, we do want a level of choice across that, but we can respect platforms having their line in the sand, and then work together on navigating how our lines match up from the pub side and the sell side. But I think what the maturing that we haven't done is that we haven't gotten away from creating good guys versus bad guys in our ecosystem. Like, there are some like just bad players that like everyone agrees and are just like, that isn't good. But when you get in that gray area, we get into a name calling match that I think benefits us from like a who wins or competitiveness. But I think we sit in the gray far more than we sit on either side, especially on the buy and the sell side. And that's what we navigate day in and day out. Jean navigates it for what her brands are asking her to do. We navigate it for like high quality publishers that we're seeing that maybe get mislabeled or misunderstood in the ecosystem. And so I think that's where the effort should be spent, is in that gray area, as opposed to pointing fingers about who's bad and who's good. But I appreciate that platforms are starting to create their thresholds, because that didn't exist before. It was everything is good and we'll listen to everything. So I think it's a balance of both.
I wouldn't say we listen to everything. I think we've always had thresholds. It's just we're probably being louder about it and being more proactive about the thresholds that we're putting in place now.
True. We didn't know. You're being more transparent about your thresholds than maybe in the past. Yeah.
We're excited about them. I think this is all for the best.
Everybody loves a threshold. I don't think that there's anybody who would not love a threshold. Okay, going to zero in even more on this. This is a question that came in from one of our attendees. I hope they're here. Some exchanges are creating deals that exclude made for advertising sites and content. Why not drop them entirely from the marketplace? We've been talking about this, wanting to see if we wanted to zero in any more there.
I can take it.
Oh, go for it, Chris. Yeah.
I was actually just before this call reading a Digiday article where Kurt from ShareThrough was describes this in one sentence. And he basically says, I won't read this line exactly, but he basically says is like, look, if we turn off MFA, then that gives our competitors an opportunity to sell even more. You know, like it's a share shift thing. And if all the SSPs all held hands and on the same day, all cut ties with all the MFA publishers, that would work out just fine, but that's not going to happen. And I think there is a very powerful financial disincentive for SSP, for any individual SSP to cut ties with a made for advertising publisher. That's just, you know, to this point of like, it's not good guys and bad guys, just incentives. Like, you know, this is the junk food of the internet. We're a grocery store. We're not going to feed junk food to our kids, but if you want to walk into our store and buy junk food, like junk food's over here, the organic apples are over there. Like, as long as there's demand for both products, we're going to put them both on the shelf. And I wish that were not the case, but that is the case. And like, we need to recognize that and then create stepping stones to move the industry to a place where made for advertising inventory isn't available in exchanges. I think a reasonable first step is what you see Share Through, Podmatic, Magnite, and I think others starting to do, removing made for advertising inventory by default when they sell a private marketplace to a buyer. And what they're basically saying is like, look, when we represent buyer interests, we do think it's our responsibility to protect them from made for advertising inventory. I think that's a good first step.
As a buyer, my perspective is not dissimilar to that, but I think it comes back to like the signals and the tools that we have to use, because there's no turn off MFA button in our platforms, right? And it comes back to that idea of that, like the fire hose of inventory that comes through programmatic, and then the platforms that we lean on, like the ones that you mentioned, Chris, to do some of that filtering for us, and that the commercial incentives aren't there to do it. But like, I think, you know, when supply path optimization kind of started, there was a handful of signals that we could look at, right? Ads.txt, sellers.json. And I think we've gotten to the point where we've really like milked those signals for all that they're worth. And it's probably time for some new signals in the bid stream that buyers can action off of so that they can make smarter decisions without having so much dependency on the platforms who are commercially incentivized to not necessarily cut that stuff out. And direct versus indirect, you know, I remember CP talking to folks at the trade desk when it first came out, and they're like, you don't want a decision off of this signal. It's not it. And I was like, I know exactly what it is. We're going to use it. But it, like, there are plenty of circumstances, right? And it happens with Mediavine, where it's like, no, the only place you can buy this inventory is Mediavine, but they just so happen to be listed as indirect in the ads.txt file, and it's good inventory. So that signal doesn't do the trick anymore. So what are we going to do as an industry to start making smarter signals?
Yeah, just building on what you said, Jean, I think that, you know, things like manager and owner domain, that's why they're so crucial, and, you know, early adopters of that, and why we are like, there are good resellers. And when, you know, Mediavine is a like manager of all of these websites, and you should be buying from them because it's the most direct path possible. But Chris, even building on what you said, I think that, you know, sure, if all of the SSPs jump together, then it would happen. But similarly, all of the DSPs. So like when we're in a head-to-head competition and they're looking at clicks, MFAs give you a lot of clicks. And so we block a lot of that by default. And that will then kind of inhibit our performance in a buyer's eyes if they're doing a head-to-head test. And so I think, you know, we will have default off MFA. There's no like no MFA button, Jean, to your point. But I think that we try to make it more difficult to buy that, but we also understand that for certain performance goals where, you know, they are buying a lot of that and there's not a full understanding of what that supply looks like, it can look like we're not performing because there isn't that kind of understanding of seller and quality and value. And so I think that goes back to the orientation around when we're talking about SPO, seller is crucial. And you need to understand that as well as the signals to understand what the performance and value at the end of the day means to you as an advertiser.
Any follow-up there?
The industry gets trapped over and over and over again in a whack-a-mole game. And what CP just outlined is the way to get away from that whack-a-mole game. There are 1.5 million websites and apps in the bid stream. There's only 1,000 sellers, and there's only like 100 or so that have any scale.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to avoid the whack-a-mole game is to pick 50 to 100 sellers that you trust and only bid into their auctions. And I assure you, you will not pick a made for advertising publisher. You won't pick some arbitrage ad network. You will pick reputable publishers and intermediaries. And then you can have your DSP do all the smart things within this sort of like boundary of supply that is controlled by companies you trust. They won't game the system to create false senses of, not real viewability in the way that made for advertising publishers do. They won't artificially inflate video KPIs to accidentally steer your ad spend away from quality supply. Like, that's the thing that brands and agencies can do. And Jean, I think you make a good point that like DSPs have a long way to go to make that easier, but like the signals are there. Like if you connect ads.txt data with sellers.json data, you can know for every auction, where's this money going? And is it going to a company that I trust? And like that's the job of the DSP. And then the job of the agency and the brand is just make the business choices about what companies do I trust. And then you don't have to manage a 500,000 domain block list. You can just say, I only transact with these trusted sellers.
But then there's a layer on top of that where like a massive value that agencies bring to brands and advertisers is economy of scale. And I don't think that, it's necessarily financially like reasonable to expect the trade desk to listen to all the signals from 100 sellers. And also for us, if we have tighter partnerships and less partnerships on the supply side, we can offer more value back to our clients. So I think there's also this like agreement on the sell side between, the suppliers and the supply platforms. And then on the demand side, also between the buyers and the demand side platforms, where there's kind of these fundamental disagreements, both sides there. That makes it hard for there to be any agreement on demand and supply.
Yeah, Jean, I think it's the trend though. We're seeing like the sell side and the buy side are actually getting closer to each other than in the past. In the past, you would default to your platform. So if you're on the supply side, you default to your SSP partner. If you're on the buy side, you default to your DSP partner, and you would make the assumption that they were doing that work for you. And I think what we have learned over time is that, really high quality buyers and really high quality sellers are coming together and talking more and not talking through intermediaries. And that takes a lot of effort. And I think that's, one of the value props of what Mediavine brings to the table is that they do that on behalf of 10,000 publishers as opposed to 10,000 publishers trying to do that on their own, because you would never be able to handle that scale. But I think it speaks to, if there are misaligned incentives on the demand side and the supply side, if the buyers and sellers get closer together and form better direct relationships, then both partner platforms will meet those expectations, and they'll build that intricacy that you're asking for from CP, and the same intricacy that I'm asking for from our SSP partners is, give us choice, build us options, give us buttons. But I do think that the buy side and the sell side getting closer together over the past 5 years or so has started to push us in that direction. And we're just not at that full maturity level yet. And that's why we're in the middle of the the conflict per se, of like what hurts us versus what helps us. And we'll get over it as an industry, but it continues to be the reason why you and I talk all the time versus us just talking through our partners.
We're in our teen years, really, is what I'm hearing everyone say. So, and it's okay. Arguments happen during that time. A brighter dawn is coming to us all. We've had a really great discussion so far, and I want to move forward into. We can all agree that we have the best intentions. I think everyone on this call, coming from all the different sides, we all want the industry to move forward. We want to become teenagers who can someday legally drink responsibly. But when it comes to implementation of this, it can really fall apart because we have all these competing interests. And a lot of this times it's considered around addressability, which is going to become only more important as Chrome deprecates third-party cookies. The can is not being kicked. It's actually happening. So, panel, will you weigh in there? I've got Chris is unmuted.
I'll take
I'm
it.
gonna start pouncing on people that are unmuted.
I'll
I'm
go
letting
next.
you know. Great.
Well, I'll be quick about it because I don't know that I've got a huge amount to contribute here. But I guess what I would say is there are a handful of credible solutions for how buyers might preserve some basic level of addressability and attribution in the absence of third-party cookies. One of the leading candidates for the addressability side, not the attribution side, is seller-defined audiences. That one, to me, feels best positioned to operate at some meaningful level of scale, but will only work when a buyer trusts that the seller is providing accurate signals about characteristics of the user. And there's publishers that I would trust and there's publishers I wouldn't, and I suspect we'd all put the same companies in the same lists. And so I'm optimistic that for the part of the industry that I care about, which is sort of like the allocation of spend through good and bad supply chains, that cookie deprecation should have a significant effect in rebalancing spend toward reputable publishers.
Building on that, Chris, couldn't agree more. And I think one of the most important signals that we see today when we decide not just, where to buy, but what to buy is identity. And so, we're getting that today through this, in CTV and audio, through this kind of explicit quid pro quo that they have with their users, where it's, of course, you're going to give Disney Plus your email, or of course, you're going to give Pandora your email. I think that becomes significantly harder in web, where there's been this kind of implicit understanding that you get ads in exchange for content because of cookies. And I think that paradigm is quickly shifting. And the partners who will be the winners in web are the ones who can have that conversation with their users because they have good content and trust and editorial teams. And so we are very bullish on things like Grow from Mediavine, as well as OpenPass, which is, a trade desk SSO, because we think there needs to be an industry-wide solution to authentication in addition to, other signals in the bid stream that replace cookies, because that email and that identity, when sent to us, we can match to Jean's clients. And you can do that in any way, LiveRamp ITS, ID5. There's a bunch of different ways to transact that identity. But I think that identity and kind of authentication is going to start to rebalance away from MFAs and towards real content. But I think we need to have a real conversation about how we communicate that to consumers and how we grow authentication in web as that implicit kind of quid pro quo goes away.
Yeah, I would say this puts us right back though in a very similar, back to the beginning of the discussion when Jean brought up scale. So I think I think we kind of circle the wagon there, and in the same challenges that we're addressing with SPO, it will have the same challenges that we address with addressability. And the reality is that buyers will need to spend the budgets to meet the KPIs of brands, and publishers will need to monetize their websites in order to create the audience existence for brands to actually buy on. So I think we're both incentivized really well on the addressability front. I think both sides want the same outcome, which is they want true identity and then they want scalability. I think we've done a really good job of an industry of addressing one-to-one addressability so far. And where we haven't done is what's going to happen after you get to that point, because it's not going to be a huge percentage. And I think that's where the buy side and the sell side will need to come together on what is it after full addressability and what does that look like. And I appreciate the call out for Grow, because I think that's important. The open internet is not this widely addressable ecosystem. And we're going to bring addressability to it, but we're also going to signal different things to the buy side so that they can create the value exchange. And so I think we're going to have to recreate the value exchange. And I think SPO having a foundation there helps it be a lot cleaner. And so I think these two go hand in hand and they build upon each other. You can't do one and not the other. But I think it does in for a lot more complexity until everything truly balances out once the cookie is fully deprecated, because we are leaning on it still heavily as an ecosystem.
So much. Like I'm
You see Jean
having,
smiling. I'm like, go, Jean, go.
I'm having like that Groundhog Day moment or deja vu, but like it's real because Amanda and I were talking about this on a panel for media.net like 5 years ago. We first started talking about the cookie deprecation. And in that moment, Amanda, you had talked about the value exchange, right? We talked a little bit more in that context about like the consumer and their experience and like taking the consumer side of it. Can we just all recognize and remember that the Trade Desk ran like a national advertising campaign like 4 years ago? Do you guys remember that commercial? I bring this up all the time. Like we've been trying to solve for this problem forever, and there's been a lot of innovation, but the problem won't be solved until the problem actually happens, because right now it's just like this boogeyman, and we know it's going to happen, but until it lands, all of the hard work and kind of where everything falls, we're not really going to know. Like there's buyers on our side and advertisers who have done all kinds of different testing, great results. There's not going to be a one and done like the third party cookie. And I think, maybe more unfortunately for consumers, the third party cookie was so anonymous compared to the solutions out there now. And it was sold to them as though it was not anonymous at all. Do you guys ever remember going to those third party data providers and you could it would take 5 hours, but they would eventually run through the data that they had on your third party cookie and they tell you who they thought you were. And it was not looking in the mirror, right? It would be like, you live in Alaska and you are a man and you're 13 years old. Like it was just bizarre what they thought, but somehow the advertising got to you in a way that was kind of your interest. And consumers do, all of our studies show that consumers are more comfortable with advertising that is related to their interests. They prefer that. It's a better experience. So I think, we'll see which solutions match up on the buy and sell side and how we tackle that. But it's a crystal ball scenario. Like there's a ton of options out there and we just won't know.
Okay. This has been a great discussion. I think we could probably talk for a few more hours, but all of us will want lunch at some point. So to wrap us up, what is the future of SSPs and DSPs in SPO? We've been talking about consolidation. Can they merge without a big conflict of interest? Where do the take rates go? What's the future? Get at your crystal ball again. I know Jean was saying a crystal ball. I'm asking for, this is a slightly different crystal ball, but pull it out for there. I've got Catherine leaning forward. She's leaning in.
Always me first, huh?
You were leaning forward and unmuted.
I mean, I'm just leaned into the conversation.
I appreciate that immensely.
I'm hopeful that we can right size the market, get more signal more transparently. We can orient around sellers that we trust, and those sellers will continue to see more share of wallet and value from our buyers. And I think that's the future that we want. And similarly to the joke we keep making about these being teenage years, we're going to have some growing pains. We're going to have some acne. There are going to be some ugly periods. But we're going to get out of this hopefully quickly, as long as we're all talking and understanding the point of view and this together. And I think a lot of the conversation to date has been about aligning incentives and making sure that, we're doing things, but still allowing optionality. I think the more that we can align incentives and kind of paint the picture of the market we want to go to together, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, growing to the adults that our grandparents will be proud of. Exactly. Amanda.
Ultimately, I think what has happened is in the past, the DSP and the SSP communities, industries were separate industries. They really worked independently of each other, and the collaboration now and the requirement to collaborate is there. And the constraints of just pushing standards. And so I think our path forward is more standardization, more transparency. And I think those that are willing to jump on those causes are going to be the winners, and those that like it the old way are not going to be the winners. And I think we're at a point where we're going to pick winners and losers. And I think that will help us. We work in a commoditized market. It's the reality of it. And so in that space, we need to start selecting. I don't want to pick one winner. I don't want to recreate the past, but I do want to create a handful of winners that make the jobs of publishers and buyers a lot better. And then have industry standards that come in to hold course. I think the transparency and the information that folks like Chris and Jounce are putting out there didn't exist in the past. And so I think we're moving in a better direction because we have more knowledge. So the more knowledge, the more signals, the better we make better choices. We bet on better winners. And as an industry, I think the buy side and the sell side can win together, but we have to acknowledge that not everyone is going to win, and we are going to have to be comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Chris.
I think there's a little bit of a sort of like an assumption that the industry is moving from, buy side companies and sell side companies to a future where they're sort of two-sided marketplaces. And I don't disagree with that, but I think we have a very, very long time period between here and there where both things have to figure out how to coexist. And basically what that means is that every ad tech company is both a partner and a competitor with every other ad tech company. And there are, in a lot of ways, this kind of reminds me of the business dynamics behind when in-housing was a whole to-do in 2013, 14, 15. And there were ad tech companies who navigated that very diplomatically, and there were ad tech companies that did not. And the reality is, like, we all knew there was going to be a future state where some very large, powerful brands wanted direct relationships with ad tech companies, and many brands wanted to defer their responsibility to their agency. We're going to have to figure that out. And I think the current winners on the buy side of the market are the companies who figured that out and figured out how to navigate that business dynamic. A similar thing's going to happen. Like, who are the SSPs and the DSPs that can kind of, like, in a mature way, acknowledge sometimes we got to collaborate and sometimes we're going to compete and we're going to make that work? And who are the ones that go too hard, either in just like, being a bull-nosed competitor, or sort of like pretending like we're going to hold on to the old framework of the industry? And I don't know who those companies are going to be, but, like, I think that's the way that winners and losers emerge over the next 5 years.
Beautifully stated, +1.
I don't disagree with what anyone's saying. I think from a client perspective, like, we at the agency will continue to be client focused and use the tools and the signals that are out there that lead to real client outcomes, and be really wary of potentially outcomes that aren't really related back to business results. And I think that's the key focus. And I think that there are market forces outside of our control. The global economy is going to force a lot of that consolidation with or without us making decisions. So there'll be things that we can't control, and we can't necessarily, when you're talking about, like, who are the winners and who are the losers, some of that stuff we're not, as buyers or sellers, going to make those decisions. That's just going to happen based on how those businesses managed their own business, and if they were able to do it in a time of consolidation and a time of uncertainty. So we'll continue to look for the signals that deliver results for our clients, and try to build partnerships with the companies that do really well and have make good decisions and have sound business plans.
Take care of your own business, really, is the message that we're sending out. And that's a great message to leave with. Panelists, any final thoughts before we close out today? All right, we've had a great discussion. We appreciate everyone joining us. We've got some great questions we did not have time to reach, but we had a request to send out the recording of this webinar. We absolutely will. And we will be planning more of these. So if you are interested in joining us for our future one in Q4, please click that link, sign up for our mailing list. We will have discussions like these, more riveting discussions about the maturation of ad tech moving from teenagers to healthy, productive adults. Thank you to Chris, Amanda, Jean, and Catherine, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.